Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin, here with my affable co-host Teos Abadia. Hey Teos, welcome to the second recording of September that we are doing.
Nice. I no longer know what time is because due to the folks on our Patreon Discord, I started watching the show Dark, and I'm very impressed by it. Have you seen
Mhm.
this?
We binged the first three seasons. I think there's either three or four seasons. So we did the first two seasons, maybe, got a couple into the third. And then my wife started having dreams about it. And when she starts dreaming about it, that's when I know it's time to stop. So we've put it aside, but we will
Yeah.
go back to it at some point soon. But yes, it is an excellent show.
Yeah. I think, I'd sort of heard it was like, oh, like a sort of like dark version of Stranger Things. And I didn't find it to be that at all. Like, I think the magic of Stranger Things is sort of this balance between 80s whimsy and then the kind of like terrible things that are happening mixed in with the appeal of D&D. But this is like, it's just a really good mystery and puzzle. And it's a lot of fun. I'm surprised how much fun it is for both my wife and I to go through this and try to disentangle it and remember who are these characters. And yeah, that's been great. And now I don't know what timeline I'm in. So
Yeah, it's the same that we were talking about this. The show is cool because you as the viewer have some mysteries you don't know, but there are some things you do know that the characters don't.
yeah.
So it's got both of those things happening at the same time. It's like, okay, we know what that person doesn't and what they're going through because of that, but we also don't know lots of things.
Yeah.
It's sort of a lost, the show Lost,
Yeah.
but a little less commercial, I guess, would
Right.
be the way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not as
So
smooth. And
it's
yeah. It also
yeah.
makes me think that it's fascinating to me that outside of a very few companies, you don't see anybody trying to make adventures like this generally. And I get it that it's
Mhm.
hard, but like I would think that somebody at Wizards, when they're thinking about multiverse spanning things, right? This kind of
Mhm.
approach, it doesn't have to be to this extent, but it could be on the table, right? To make the multiverse more
Mhm.
magical, mysterious versus just, hey, another portal to another place, right? Like perfect.
Yeah, it it would adventures like that would require a bit of buy-in from the players ahead of time. And some DMs and some DMs don't want that. Some DMs just
Hmm.
want the players to be reacting, and so that sort of thing is harder to do. And then some players don't want to buy into the story. They want to react. They just want it to be, whether for game mechanical reasons or story reasons, they just want to be reacting to what situation set in front of them. And it's harder to do that in a time twisty story.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
if it could be done, yeah. If it could be
Cool.
done, I'd love to read it, play it. We'd have to see.
Yeah.
But thanks to our Discord, Teos got into Dark, and thanks to our listener corner, we're going to get some questions and thoughts from our listeners. First is Kurt Ugel via YouTube, who has this question: do you have any tips or tricks for rules regarding poison? Is there a system that you feel handles it particularly well? Throughout the various editions of D&D, the rule mechanics for poison have often been contentious to the point that the game designers seem to want to avoid having it in the game. Like magic or explosives, it can make scenarios seem too unbalanced and may be somewhat off-putting in an already violent game. Thanks, Kurt, who is trying to appease the player of an assassin slash apothecary. It all makes sense now. Teos, you had some initial thoughts on this, so hit us.
Yeah, I mean, I think this came off of our episode. We were talking about how the DMG handles poison and disease and other kind of well, other weird things like that. And I think the question at a broad level is that it's really hard to design a rule for poison as the DMG does that then fits all of your needs. It's almost a backwards application of the logic, right? Because if our poison is supposed to be a situational problem, like we're talking about the noble fed the party poison, you have 24 hours to find the cure, right? Like that's a story thing, and it that requires a different application where you need to have these 24 hours to solve it, and maybe feel its effects, and maybe they increase over time. You really want something completely custom that's going to touch on that story angle. Or if it's a monster threat, the drow poisons their blade. What should that do? And that gets into, well, isn't the drow already a balanced CR? So is their CR higher? If it's a one-time threat, like spiders, right? Classically, spiders have done a bite, and then if you fail at saving throw against poison, there's this big hit of damage. But that is actually balanced into it. It's a sort of lopsided on or off switch of what happens. So all of this, it makes it so that I think the DMG's one poison rule really falls short, and it's why generally in adventures, if a poison comes up, you see it just tailored to that situation rather than reflecting one set of logic. But Kurt's talking about assassin apothecary, Shawn, and I guess there, we might start with the fact that, well, your class is already balanced, whatever class they are. What are we supposed to give them? What would you recommend?
Yeah. What Teos is talking about here is in terms of the game mechanic, short term and long term, right? Short term is something that happens and it's over, and it threatens you in that short term with hit points, maybe with a condition that lasts for a minute. And so you can look at it in that way. And that's sort of where we're looking at it here in terms of a player class, because a player could poison a monster. If it's sick for 24 hours, that doesn't matter because the monster is going to be dead in approximately 24 seconds. So that has less. That's why we have poison damage now, which is something that we didn't have in previous editions. Rather than dealing with this balance between short-term and long-term effects, we can just say, okay, we have monsters, we have characters that poison people. You do poison damage instead of bludgeoning or instead of fire, and it's the same thing. If you want to add a short-term condition, then there is a balance that is supposed to take place for challenge rating, which is, okay, if your poison stuns someone, that's going to add something to the challenge rating of a monster or the strength of a class. We can figure that out mathematically. Yeah. If you frighten someone with your poison, that's a thing. If you drain their strength, that's something else. Then now the long-term thing is what we've talked about last week, which is how does that fit into the game in terms of the story? And that's where you have 24 hours to find the cure. You can't, it's very, very hard to get both of those things working together in a way that's satisfying. Players hate exhaustion, but they hate when their characters become exhausted, right? That's poison. It's the same situation. There is a long-term effect that may get worse or may get better, but then how do you work that out? And how do you tell a player, oh, this is fun. I'm going to poison your character and you are just going to get more debilitated over time and possibly die at the end. But this is fun. This is good. We're going to make a great story out of this. Can you make a great story out of it? Yes. Is it easy to do? No. It's easier to say you're poisoned. You feel fine, but you know that when this time runs out, bad things are going to happen. That's a more fun story, but it's less feasible to work into a game system when you're trying to do like incremental problems. So yeah, what I would say for the player is just have them do poison damage. If you're making a class, give them the ability of to make certain kinds of poisons that might do less damage, but might cause a monster to be stunned or a creature that is attacked by the character to have disadvantage on the next attack roll because their vision's blurry or whatever reason. To give those small things that still feel like poison without making it a longer term problem in the game.
Yeah, I think you generally, because the game is already balanced, you have to take something that's already in the system and turn it into that source of poison. So you're either making their subclass into a poisoner class. So comb the subclasses and find one where you think, well, I could reskin this to just be poison effects. Or you have to use consumable magic items and make poison really rare and come up with how you find it. And those consumables, the way that you would, potions or scrolls or anything else, are being used every now and then. Or something of that nature. Like you in some way need to do that, or a system of trade-offs. Or something like, like every time they crit, something could happen because of poison, but it's not happening. So the equivalent of a strong magic item, if you will, instead of the, something that crits and here's the awesome damage effect, well, it's the poison gets released or something like that. Dagger venom could be an interesting type of magic item to give them and play with, and they can store up poisons and maybe one of them releases on a crit. Something like that could be interesting without unbalancing it, because all the other players would otherwise go, what can my character get? Or can we all use poison?
Right. And that's the other thing about it, is having a character class that can do it's one thing. Oh, I can put venom on my blade. Well, why don't I make venom for everybody? And now everyone's doing an extra 76 damage on their attacks, and it loses its in-world logic.
Yeah.
The other thing that happens with poison is at higher levels, everyone has access to Hero's Feast. And it's such a popular spell, which then makes you immune to poison. So it's yet another thing in the game where at low level, it's a huge benefit or a huge risk, or, a huge variable within the game. And then at higher levels, it's just nothing.
That reminds me of another thing when it comes to things like poisons, is that if you have a character that's going to be doing poison damage all the time, I would just make it a blanket rule that undead are immune to it. In the rules, most of them are, but not all. Just make them all immune, right. And then that way the player always knows, hey, it's undead, I'm not going to waste this. Versus, like, at least as a player, I hate wondering whether, my poison thorns will do something or whatever. Like, just, it's undead, no. Is an easier rule. If you're going to have a lot of undead in the campaign, or give them some way to figure it out because they're a poisoner, something like that. Because it's very frustrating from the player side to not know whether you can waste a precious resource, especially on it, or choose an action that's going to deal with no damage.
Yep. Awesome. So, Kurt, thank you for that question. And now the next question comes from Andrew B via Twitter. If you were making the first major adventure release for D&D 2024, what would that adventure be? What would it be like? Not story per se, but type of story, such as setting, theme, level range, etc. What do you think Wizards of the Coast will do? Will we see a reprint? And so I've been thinking about this, so I was glad when Andrew asked it.
He asks good questions.
As I am often want to do, I will answer a question with not just one question, but several questions. The first question would be, what are you trying to do with this first adventure? Are you trying to tempt new players, people who might be just coming in? Are you trying to keep existing 5e players with something that's really wild or really unique? Or are you trying to make something that's sort of a basic adventure but make it solid? Or are you trying to bring nostalgia into it to tempt maybe people that are still playing older editions and haven't made the jump yet? That's the first question. What are you trying to do? Right now, I think if it were coming out within the next 6 months, my answer would be, well, look at Baldur's Gate 3. It is in the zeitgeist of gamers, and it's in the zeitgeist of video game fantasy RPG players. They are the perfect target group if you're going after people who maybe aren't playing D&D yet, but love games, love adventure games, love role-playing adventure games. I would make Baldur's Gate something the first adventure, because we know that video gamers will spend money, and that's what you need as an audience. So hit them while they're curious. Hit them with a D&D adventure that not just mentions Baldur's Gate, but brings in plot hooks, side quests, the NPCs from that video game, and just go. Because not only are you bringing in those video game players, maybe you're sending D&D players who might not have gotten into the video game yet over in that direction as well. However, we don't know when that first 2024 adventure is coming out. Is it going to be released on the heels of the core books? Assuming the core books come out at the later end of 2024, and if you don't have this first adventure ready to go, you're talking 2025. So over a year now, almost a year and a half probably, until that first game comes out. Will Baldur's Gate 3 still be in the zeitgeist? Maybe, but probably not. So what will be in the zeitgeist then? Stranger Things final season. The new D&D TV series is supposedly in the works. If that's going to be in the zeitgeist, and now you need to coordinate with your partners and your own internal teams to figure out what's going to be in the zeitgeist. Hey, marketing. Hey, sales. Hey, whatever. What's going to be happening then? Hey, our license team. Who are we licensing with, and what might be coming out then? Point it in that direction and go from there. So there's lots of things that I would do, but I would need to answer all of those questions first, and I don't have answers to those questions.
So I like a lot of what you're saying. I mean, really, I like all of it. But the things that really resonate with me is almost everything you're saying involves new players. And I think that's what you'd want to look at. Like, that's one of the answers to the question, is that you've got to address the fact that you, as D&D, should want to grow the audience. So you need to have something that will have broad appeal and bring in a lot of folks. You're not going to hit them with a nostalgia piece over it. And it's interesting to note that, we're getting Fendelver and Below right now, which does serve as an introduction, certainly has in the past. It can be an introduction. But one piece I'd add to everything you said is that you ideally want an adventure that does something that none of the starter sets have really done well for D&D, and that is launch other experiences. And I think a common complaint has been that if you buy a starter set adventure and you run it, you're not sure what to connect to. Like the Storm... Why can I never remember the name of it?
Stormwreck Isle.
Wreck Isle. Thank you. Stormwreck Isle, ends on a sort of weird level that doesn't link into any of the old adventures, which sort of link to the starter set level-wise, but often not thematically very well, and often have a good piece that you want to run as first. And so I think that if there was something that was a little better, it was really designed to end in a way that would lead to other adventures, that might work really well. Something that was an obvious hook to even things that are maybe many things that have been published and will be published, because they have that sort of, you've met these contacts and the world's your oyster from here. Where do you want to go? And would expressly say to the DM, your group can go to A or B or C or D. Go for it. This all links up, and here's how. That would be really useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, we could answer this in a ton of different ways, and I think we have. But with putting our business hats on, as friends of mine say, our Ferengi ears, or putting those on, how do we best synergize this adventure with whatever other initiatives are happening at the time? So that's a sort of short, and it's not a cop out, but it's this is what we would do given all of these other things.
Yeah.
Anything else? You good?
No, I think that's great. I mean, this is one of these where you really, the answer to this question is sitting down in a lot of meetings and working through things until you end up with the remaining logical answer that still stands after you batter it with all the questions.
For sure. And now we will get to our news and our commentary section, starting with the Unearthed Arcana 2024 playtest packet number 7. It is out.
You and I read it
ready.
cover to cover, right, Shawn?
cover to cover in the sense that I read the front and then I read the end.
Let me at least look at the first
What's in
word and the
between in
last
those
word. I have now done that too.
57 pages in between? Okay, what does it get? Well, we get in it the Barbarian has been redone, including a completely new subclass called the Path of the World Tree. They updated the Berserker, the Wild Heart, which was formerly the Totem Warrior, and the Zealot subclasses. They messed around with attacking recklessly for a bit. Brutal critical gets some damage buffs, etc. Do you want to talk about the fighter real quick?
Yeah, and what I might say, Shawn, is we've in our show notes put in kind of what they did for each class, courtesy of Ian World. Thank you, Ian World, for summarizing this, because I have not looked at this. I've done a little listening to folks talking about it, but that's about it. And in general, what I see here for the Barbarian, the Fighter, the Sorcerer, the Warlock, and the Wizard is, on one hand, a retreat back from sort of various unearthed arcana attempts that happened in the first packets to something that feels a lot more like the current 2014 version, but with a few changes. And so each of the classes sort of has a little bit that is changing. Sometimes it's renaming, sometimes it's a tweak to how things work. At a broad level, things like class spell lists are back. So that whole idea of, I forget what they're even called, but arcane and divine and primal or whatever it was, we're back to saying, here's the wizard class list. There are things from Tasha's Call of Everything that are now expressly in here. We see updates to some of the spells. So there's a lot here that I think, we've gone on a long trip to end up almost where I would have liked the beginning to be, but maybe I should be happy that this is the end point, right? We're not getting a wild divergent, even if compatible 2024. We're getting a 2024 that feels a lot closer to 2014. And I think that's probably good for the game. You can take a look at the actual document itself. We've got a link here. Jeremy Crawford did a 90-minute interview presentation on the changes and what's behind them. And then we've got coverage of Ian World linked here as well. I don't know, Shawn, any other thoughts on UA 7?
No, I think we've talked about it before. Once they hit on the idea that, okay, the game is not going to change dramatically. It's not going to be a 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 or 4 to 5. This is going to be 5.001. I was like, okay, cool. I don't need to study every single change. I'm going to like some of the changes. I'm not going to like some of the other changes. The only thing that I fear, and it's not even a fear, it's more a cynical nod, is when you try different things and you look at the reviews from the players, from the DMs, and what you notice is a trend that anything that was changed for making it less powerful was hated, and everything that was changed to make it more powerful was liked. Then that's the time when you need to pay less attention to your playtest feedback.
Or
Because all you're
right?
doing is
Uncover
making
the why of it, not
right.
the damage and whatever of it, but the
that's assuming that you figured out the why. The why being, okay, well, this gives either more options or more power to player characters. Then all you're doing is having institutionalized power creep.
Well, I'll say another thing,
again,
Shawn, if I can cut you.
I'm fine with.
Yeah. If I can cut in here, just another thing to piggyback off of this is that almost all the feedback is coming from people reading things rather than playing things, which is very different than D&D Next, where people were playing through packets and trying out these different iterations. And so it's fantastic to me that we were just at, I was just at PAX West running hundreds and hundreds of players through 2014. Why weren't those players trying out 2024 to get excited for 2024 and to get really good play feedback of how it works at the table? But nobody in this entire process has ever created a playable packet. And I think that's a really, really wild thing. And it's equally wild that, tying also into things you're saying, the Unearthed Arcana has made these broad tests of things. And I have to go back and say, well, why did you do those things? You did those things either because you thought the system needed to change, or because you thought because there were problems, or you thought that this new thing was better, but you felt a need for these things. And now you're saying there is no need for these things. And to me, that's not either it was needed or it wasn't, right? Like D&D Next knew it had to do certain types of things, and it pursued a course to learn from it and then make it. And it's almost like here, it's like, well, people didn't like it, let's just back off. But the vision has never been clear. Certainly hasn't been communicated clearly. I'd be shocked if internally it was clear. It feels constantly revised and just like, well, you know what? Let's retreat back to this part. Which, I mean, I'm happy to be there versus somewhere that we shouldn't be. But it all feels to me like it's not solid and makes 2024, who knows? But it may mean that 2024 is a bit more of a stepping stone when it could be something else.
Well, I think we answered this probably 2 years ago, 18 months ago, which is, I don't think the design team thought they needed a new edition, right? I think it was higher ups who said, we need something to put out on the 50th anniversary of D&D. Hey, it would be great if we had a new edition. And probably most of the people sitting there at Wizards of the Coast went, look at what 5e is doing. Look at how popular it is and growing in popularity. We don't need a new edition. Yeah. Maybe we could tweak it a little bit. And then comes the panic of being a person put in that position where you're told from above, you need to make a new edition of the game. And you're sitting there going, we don't want to make a new edition of the game. People are not going to want a new edition of the game. But if we don't change it, they're just going to say, we're not going to buy this new edition of the game that's the same as what we just played. So they were put into an impossible position. They did the best they could by putting out some compatible-ish content that was divergent from there. People spoke up and said, we're happy with the way it was. Why change it? That was the market feedback that they were looking for, to say, okay, we don't need to make a big change. We can make a small change. People will buy it, and we can satisfy the gods of 50th anniversary. We need sales, and the gods of the players who are going to be playing this game. Hence, players want more options and want a little bit of more power than they had, and I have a feeling that's what they're going to get. Hopefully, the monster rules will follow suit to make it so it's a little more challenging for this new breed of rules that will give players a little bit more.
Well, I'm looking forward to when you and I look into Phandelver and below, because one of the things that's interesting is it's very clear that Phandelver, I'm not spoiling anything, Shawn, but Phandelver has been tweaked for what they think 2024 will be, in terms of language, in terms of approach. And, so I think, what the answer isn't is vast changes to monsters, which I think we've, heard, but somehow you have to make up for that. And so how do you do that? Well, one of the most obvious answers is, well, add more monsters. And all of that, to me, is still a lack of vision around being able to see why 5e has been so popular. And yes, of course, players want more candy. So do my kids. I cannot just give them more candy. The most important thing is not me giving them candy. It's teaching them to brush their teeth. Because good God, the cost of dental care, right? I mean, those are the hard lessons of life sometimes, that yes, we all want candy. It's really not what we actually need. And so focus on.
We're separating our in-depth look at the mechanics and the game design from how it's actually used. So wizards can give their kids candy. In fact, wizards can give them all the candy they want, and the people who are actually consuming the game can become the dentists who will fix the problems that are made by this candy, and everybody wins, right? The players win because they have more power. Wizards wins because even though the game might not be mathematically as good as it could be, there are still people out there buying it, and they're going to fix the problems at their own tables.
Yeah.
So your analogy I appreciate, except no one has to pay the dental bills at the end when you're making a game that everyone's buying.
Maybe what I'd say is where
we can,
yeah, at the end of the day, you're trying to attract tons of players, and we've said this from the very beginning, right? Adding feats, adding these kinds of complexities to character classes, that stuff has still remained. And when the game isn't changing substantially, I'm surprised those things weren't part of the mix of what was, re-examined and thought, hey, maybe everybody doesn't need all of this extra complexity, but it feels like what they first showed us for backgrounds, for ancestries becoming, the stone cunning becomes battleish rather than being a thing that's the exploration pillar, a number of things related to anything exploration. Those things have all retreated, and I don't know that jives with the things that are drawing people to the game. But we shall see, and I'm sure 5e will be strong regardless. But I'll tell you, I'm going to change the tenor with something I did really like, and that's this puppy right here. I got a copy of PAX.
Yep.
And it's sort of surprising how I don't hear a ton of people talking about it. There are a lot of things I like. I'm not very far into it. I'm a third of the way through. I do notice the larger font and shorter size of the book. Like, I haven't been reading that long, and I've made it through a lot of topics. Just kind of like, wow, these are shorter books. But what I really appreciate is they have taken a very they've done a concerted effort here to showing giants as not being just singularly evil, and rather show the complexity behind them. And it's amazing. Like, if you look at the hooks, I feel like 3/4 of the hooks are things like, a giant has shown up near this village, but it's because they lost their pet bear. And you read all of these, and you're like, wow, that's cool. It really shows you how you can hit, a lot of stories from a lot of different sides. But a lot of times I'm kind of like, well, if I did a bunch of these, there's no combat possibly. And I think that maybe there's a second part that needs to come in the conversation. And I'm happy that this is here, but I think there almost needs to be another part of the conversation that says, like, hey, this is a game about combat, D&D, especially the way 2024 is being written. How do we keep players really interested in doing the combat stuff when you treat your foes this way as not foes so many times? It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, we've got a lot to talk about in terms of Wizards of the Coast products that we have yet to be able to get a hold of. Well, in my case, you got a hold of it. I didn't, because we have Phandelver early release coming out in a week. So I will be able to review it then, I hope. Planescape is coming October 17th. The description now says that it's for levels 3 to 10 with a jump to level 17 in there as well, which is something new and interesting as a way to support those people that want high-level content without having to write a bunch of content that might not be used. So I think that was an interesting move. And the Book of Many Things is coming on November 14th. So we've got a lot to look forward to. You had a note about that book.
Yeah, two quick notes. One is that for those running Phandelver and below, there's a free handout from the Phandalin Post on D&D Beyond. So we've got a link in our show notes there. And it's basically the newspaper cover, but it's a fun kind of handout to give to your players. For the Book of Many Things, they've introduced a new character, right? Sometimes, in fact, just the other day, I was thinking to myself, like, Tasha, Moradin, Kanan, Bigby. I mean, geez, they even made Bigby an elf rather than create a new, or a gnome, instead of creating a new character. And I thought to myself, are they ever going to try to just create new characters that are, famous NPCs? So apparently, the Book of Many Things will introduce Asteria, the first canonically autistic character in D&D. And in a Polygon article that we've linked here, Wizards designer Mackenzie DeArmas discusses how she blended her own experiences with autism into the character. It's a really nice read, and I'm glad to see that. Though I tend to think that the way to introduce NPCs is less sort of setting kind of books and more in adventures where you interact with them and find them to be interesting and kind of they develop their lore over time that way. But it's cool. I'm looking forward to seeing how they did this.
Yeah. So all of those links are in our show notes, and we will continue, or hopefully in our case, start to look at some of these things when we finish our Dungeon Master's Guide review. Next in the news, there is an RPG wish list for the prison book program. So there was a recent article called When Wizards and Orcs Came to Death Row, and it talked about D&D as a lifeline for prisoners who are on death row. If you didn't see it, if you didn't get a chance to read it, I think it was in the New York Times at first. It was behind a paywall, but we have a link in our show notes so you should be able to access it. And it was a powerful read. Teos, I know that you read it as well, so I will let you.
Yeah, I mean, just the loss of personal freedoms that prisoners deal with, and then how D&D allows for ways to sort of regain that sense of freedom in some ways. It allows people to come together and work through issues together and creates bonds that they otherwise can't create in a prison program. So off of that article, people have begun to share links to different prison programs, and one of them is the prison book program, which seeks specific RPG books to provide to prisons. So we've got a link to that and to the kind of basic web page that it comes off of. So there's the wish list, and then there's the program itself. There's two separate links. So if you want to donate to that cause, you can. There are also programs by which you can donate specific books, but it's a little harder to match sort of their needs to what you might want to buy on sale. So this is a nice, straightforward way to do it if you're interested in helping that way.
And last but not least, our creator spotlight this week. We have a few things. First, I wanted to mention that Peter Lee put up an article on BoardGameGeek.com where he went into great and beautiful detail talking about his design for the game Aberration, which is a board game set in Grim Hollow, which is Ghostfire Gaming's main setting. If you are into game design, whether it's role-playing game or board game or any sort of game design, check out this blog article because it is amazing. The detail, all of the things that Peter talked about in terms of the steps he took along the way while designing this game with the folks at Ghostfire is incredible. And the crowdfunding for the game starts on GameFound on September 26th. So if you go to gamefound.com and look up Aberration, you will be able to find it and set yourself a reminder to back it if you so choose. And one more thing from Ghostfire Gaming. We started putting content up on Drive-Thru role-playing games, Drive-Thru RPG. And we've got our first adventure up there. It's episode 1 of our Agents of the Empire fable called Razorfin. This is a 6-episode adventure path. This first episode, I've run a shortened version of it at conventions, and the players seem to have a really good time. It's sort of James Bond meets D&D. So it's super spies. You go, you get your weird contraptions and try to use them and try to stop these villains from taking over the world. So that one is out there for you. And Teos, you had a couple things you wanted to call out.
Yeah, well, first I'll say I've really enjoyed that Agents of the Empire, so I highly recommend picking it up. A couple things. Reminders to check out Old Town Saga by MT Black, Kickstarter right now. Weapons of Legend by Jeff Stevens. and The Folk from Harrowthorpe by JVC Pari. We've mentioned these in previous shows, but links are in the show notes. They're all on Kickstarter. Great works by these folks. Kickstarters feel like they've been a little slow recently. Like all of these I thought would be bigger. They're doing well, but I thought they would have been bigger. And so check them out. It's a good time to help creators. And the last thing I'll mention is an article that is by Luis Loza, Getting Started Writing for Paizo, but it equally tells you how to write for Wizards or any other major companies. It's a short but very good read with excellent advice that covers learning by writing constantly, creating a portfolio, learning the language and approach of specific games, and then how to reach out to get work. It's a good read. If you're curious about how to get started, this is a good place to turn to.